Hi everyone, Jen here from Autism, Odd ADHD virtually. I wanted to throw this on as content for this month. It is Autism Acceptance Month, and I wanted to be able to contribute in some way during this month. Tomorrow we are doing a professor training. They're going to be learning and hopefully imparting knowledge, more like it, on how to support their neurodivergent students in their classroom. And one of the things I'm going to be touching on is okay, well, why are autistic kids autistic and how does that affect other parts of how they process things, how they see the world, how they think about the world, and the effects that has on the brain? You know, I did this interview with Corey and Jillian and Linda a few months ago. We talked about Linda's book called One in 10,000. And I'm touching on that because where we think autism has come from and where science has told us autism has its roots in has been very wrong in the past. When Linda's son was diagnosed, her son was born in 1975, same year as me, don't do the math. But when he was born, he was their first child. She loved her husband. They had a nice little house and perfect little family. And she was just, it was all wonderful. Then she noticed some things that were different about her son. And by the time she went to get a diagnosis to see a psychiatrist and get all the testing done, the psychiatrist told her that the reason her son was the way he was is A, he's autistic. So got that one right, except 1 in 10,000 was a number. We know that is not true at all. We lost a lot of autistic brains during that time. They're called the lost generation, actually, and they're finding themselves now. So there's a lot of late diagnosed autistics. Why do we have so many late diagnosed autistics? It's because we miss them all. We miss so very many of them. And in that case, 99 out of every 100, actually, I believe that's how the math comes out. But the man told her, okay, your son's autistic, rare, 1 in 10,000. And yeah, you're at fault. You are a refrigerator mom. You didn't love and connect and hold and bond with your child. And that's why this is happening. And this will continue to happen as long as you continue not to be able to create that bond. And I remember during this interview, and I encourage everybody to go back and watch it. It was long, but man, it was like my favorite interview of all time. Where she's talking about this. And this happens like I am old, okay, many years ago, but it's like she's in that seat and she's in that office and that person is looking at her and telling her in that moment, and the pain in her eyes and voice is just heartrending. And you can kind of imagine if you're a parent, if somebody said that to you, what that would make you feel like. But to be in a room with a parent that that's their truth is completely, completely different. So let's move forward. My son was diagnosed 17 years ago. And at that time, the talk was that autism was caused by vaccines. I mean, that's the talk you heard because this is how an autism diagnosis was back then and is still today. Hey, your kid's autistic. See ya. It's like, what do you happen to hear in society is all you're really going to hear. They don't tell you. They don't tell you what I'm going to tell you. They don't give you any information at all. And so I'm sent out there. My kid's 6 at the time he was diagnosed, and I'm hearing vaccines cause autism. So that kind of gives you this image that you're born with a neurotypical child, right? And then this villain, this monster that is autism comes and sucks out parts of their brains and their skills, and it's just on top of them all the time. And in the world, you have that child pre-autism and then the child post-autism. And we keep those two kids apart, which means you think of them as separate entities, right? And I admit to a time when I kind of saw it that way. There was my son, and then there was like this wall between him and I. Like autism was outside of him. It was just something he had that he carried with him, but it wasn't really him. We now know that, okay, talking about vaccines, still see this today. And no one ever says, hey, actually, have you heard of neural pruning? We're not there yet. This asshat family in Britain paid an asshat psychologist in Britain to create a study and create the statistics and the findings that vaccines and autism were connected. It's not true. It's been disproved many times. The dude lost his license, but yet still we hear this from 16 years ago. Okay, yeah, we've moved on better. Like, at least I wasn't told I was a problem when my son was diagnosed, but we have the answers now. We have a lot, like over 10 years of science that just keeps on piling on. This is why some children are born autistic. Okay. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So, in order to understand the kind of neural pruning we're talking about and the actual process behind that leaves a brain autistic versus a brain typical, right, developmentally typical, is the synapses. That's synaptic pruning is the main thing, okay? So in order to understand that, we have to understand how our neurons and our synapses work together. Now they carry messages and from like, okay, here's a initial message to making it happen out in the real world. So there's two kinds of neurons. There's excitatory neurons and inhibitory neurons. And when you're born, you have like a ridiculous amount of these neurons in your brain. If you're autistic, you have a higher percentage of excitatory neurons in your brain, and you should have, which could link back to a gene that they're like copy paste, copy paste, copy paste this many times and then stop. Like that stop might not be there, but every child has a ridiculous amount of neurons that they don't need. Okay. This is a picture of excitatory neurons, and their job is to basically be the roadways to get messages from one place to another. And a synapse's job is to tell the next guy, the next roadway, how important this is until it gets to the end. You know what? Let's try to explain this in a different way. So I want you to visualize this. There is a delivery guy, right? Delivery guy's got a message. This action potential, that's the first one. That's the first neuron that has the message. Maybe, we'll say the message is getting a little parched over here. Could use a sip of water. That's the message. Or the message is you're leaning on a turned on oven. Your hand is burning. Move your hand. Okay. Anyways, whatever the message is, it's in that box. The delivery dude carries it to the synapse, which is the connection station between the two roadways, right? And Jenkins is in charge. There's a Jenkins in every synapse, and the Jenkins job is to prioritize these messages. It's his job to say, oh, getting a little parched, want a sip of water. Well, that's low priority, low priority. And I'm going to put a low priority tag on it, and I'm going to send you on. Okay. Oh my gosh, our hands on fire, burning, terrible pain. That's like crazy high priority. Dude, I am not just sending you out on a rocket. I'm going to send you out every way I can. Now, neurons can send messages two ways. One is electrically, okay? And one is chemically. Now, for each neuron to work, the electricity has to be running through them. The synapses are what can connect them together so that they're connected into the system, right? And they can send messages one of two ways. Most just do electrical, but they can also do chemical, right? And some do chemical and some, and in like a pinch, man, those ones that are usually sending electrical messages can also send it out chemically. So your hand's on fire, dude, I'm not only going to tell this dude to send it electrically, also chemically. Got two messages. Chemically is faster, gonna get there, hopefully, but just in case, we also have electrically going on. So you have the same message, two different times, going to the same spot, crazy high priority. And Jenkins is done. He's sitting there still. Here comes another dude in the box. Now, this dude in the box could be, right, on a rocket ship, but Jenkins doesn't know. Jenkins is going to look into that box and then make his own choice about how priority is, move it on, like dominoes. Now, there is no eye of mortar. Am I saying it right? No overseeing supervisor who makes sure that Jenkins is doing his job, just like every other Jenkins. Although usually Jenkins are pretty much on board with however the brain is set up. So if you have an interest-based nervous system like ADHD, I'm really hungry, I need to eat something, could be low priority over, hey, got to beat this bad guy before I go to bed on this video game. So my Jenkins are individual to us, but they pretty much do the same job. They make the same calls all the way throughout. Okay. And that's how a synapse and neurons work together in order to send a message here. Nobody's watching over them. Nobody's checking on the delivery guy. And by the way, if you have a bunch of delivery guys delivering a bunch of packages, guess which one's going to go out the door, that final door? High priority dude's going to get out there. Didn't get a drink, wasn't that thirsty. That one didn't even make the top 10 list, right? Thrown out. So even neurotypicals don't always follow through on every message that their brains send. So when you're born, you have a surplus of neurons, right? But you don't have a surplus of synapses. They develop over the first 2 years of your life. And the SVA's role is to prune a set of a number of synapses along a set timeline as infants grow into adults to keep their neurons firing at their optimal speed. SVA, I'm calling it the synaptic or the synapse variance authority because we're doing this as a play on Loki. Love that character. Love the show. So if you're familiar with the TVA, just another connection to make. When you're born, okay, this is what your synaptic system looks like, okay? 3 months, it's grown. 6 months, really grown. 2 years, wow, it's like a jungle out there, right? And through the learning process, we learn the synapse variance authority will trim off useless neurons. Like, say, for example, you want to go to Joe's ice cream shop and from where you are. And for me, maybe it's like a drive down 54, right onto Apple Street, a left on Maple. Boom, I'm there. Or that's one path. Now remember, synapses and neurons are nothing but pathways. Another way I could get there in my brain is maybe like I go off to Philadelphia. I go jump on the expressway. I go to Philly. I go like 2 hours straight and then zigzag back down. I end up on Apple Street, make a right instead, and then another right, and boom, there I am. Okay. The learning process is the synaptic guys are like, okay, you know what? This one first way was crazy fast. It didn't waste energy. That's the way to go. We don't need this long, convoluted pathway to get to the same place and see ya. Okay. And as kids grow into adults and the more pruning that happens, the better and more efficient your brain becomes. If they do their job right, the SVA prunes about 41% of the neurons, right? And that's great. Optimal brain box going on here. But if you're autistic, by late childhood, the SVA is only pruned about 16% of the synapses, whereas they should have pruned 50%. That's 50% of the job they should have completed, okay, on a neurotypical brain. That means an autistic's brain's neural density is a great deal higher than a neurotypical brain at any point in their development. Sorry, this is Lola. Okay, I'm still going though. Yeah, we're still going. Look, you interested? Do you have neurons? Got it. Yeah, you do. Not enough though. Yeah, you can use some more. So as I was saying, yeah, 50% of the job they should have done. So an autistic brain has a lot more neurons on board, which means that their brain is a lot more interconnected. In fact, as you grow up, there are parts of your brain that used to talk to each other that will never, ever, ever get back together. But if you have an autistic brain, they're still talking. And there are unexpected and unusual connections from your upstairs brain to your downstairs limbic system brain and all over the place that messages can be sent and messages are sent. This is just a picture of, let's say, our senses, for example. Let's talk about senses for a minute inside of an autistic brain. Now, often, like I will see videos of, hey, this is what it's like for me at Walmart. And they are terrifying. I can imagine, like, I wouldn't want to go in there. I don't want to go in there anyways. Like, if that were that horrific for me, I sure as heck wouldn't go there. Or I want to go to, or I go to a grocery store. This is what it's like for me. And some of our brains are like, they might be just dramatizing it. But the truth is, they're not. And science is showing that. So when you're little, some of your senses might accidentally get mixed up and talk to each other. But as you get older and those systems set, your sense of smell is never going to be interacting with your sense of touch. Okay. But if you're an autistic person, it always will be on some level. You have all of these interesting, unexpected connections, including the connections that run all your senses, and you're going to have senses that flow together. Now, if you want to know what it's like to be autistic sensory wise, you could just drop some acid or take some other cyclophane that turns on all of these like connections that were turned off because the SVA was turning all of them off, turns them back on, and you're like, oh, look at all the colors. Or, wow, man, how they never noticed that clock was so, wow, how do I say it? Not that I have, but I'm just assuming that if you were on, LSD, that might be how you would be experiencing the world. You're really tripping. You're seeing things, hallucinations, like stuff that's not there. All of your senses are just totally all tangled up together. And there you go. But for an autistic person, that is pretty much life. But it's lifelong. So they learn to get a little bit better at these connections, and they learn to balance their senses a little bit better. Not only does their brain get somewhat better at it, they can do things like, I'm sorry, 1 second. They can do things like put headphones on, right? Or if there's a word that they hear that tastes like Brussels sprouts, like that can actually happen. They can choose not to use that word when they're adults. If there's something they feel like cotton feels like sandpaper, they can choose not to wear cotton, as they get older. But when we're kids, they don't have a lot of choices, and we don't give them a lot of choices because we don't understand truly how immense this is for an autistic brain. So if you're an autistic brain, you have a lot more um, synapses, a lot more neurons. And autistic brains have 50% more synapses in the cerebellum alone. The cerebellum does some super important stuff, right? Like motor planning. So often autistic people, how they move is different, yeah? And part of moving is regulating, but part of moving is just the natural way that they move. Visual working memory, remembering what you've seen. Where did I put my phone? Where did I do this? Things that rapid eye movements, which is super helpful in sleep. If you can't get good REM sleep, you can stay asleep for like 12 hours a day and still like mentally fall apart because we need that part of sleep in order to rewire, revamp, and recharge our brains. Divided attention. Okay. So you're autistic, you've got this thing called monotropism, right? Or monotropic attention, where you can attend to one thing. Okay. But if other stuff comes at you, that just like sets you off. Like, okay, you know what? I'm doing this one thing. Wait till I'm done doing this one thing and then tell me to do the next thing. Or maybe it isn't something you're telling. Maybe like you're doing one thing and the door knocks and somebody's knocking at the door and your kid suddenly starts screaming. Okay, it's because that took their attention away from that and they couldn't handle that. The divided attention can be very hard. Mental arithmetic for my kid, he has like a chalkboard in his head. He can do it. Some kids with autism may be missing that mental image, like be able to put pictures in their head. Some kids just like hear words and see pictures. What else do we have here that's interesting? I'm not going to touch on everything. Of course, a lot of language stuff, verbal fluency, word comprehension, language processing. A lot of having an autistic brain means that your body may be delayed in some ways to your brain. So in order for you to send out a message, right, and for it to happen, it will take longer. Or if a message comes in, you decode it, send it back, takes longer. We also take in a whole lot more. So our download speed, right, if you're autistic, is like crazy high, but your upload speed pays the price for that. So language processing can be an issue for body-mind connection. You'll see it with apraxia, dyspraxia, lots of all kinds of stuff with that. So for example, maybe your kid's non-speaking, doesn't mean necessarily they're non-thinking. If your kid's non-speaking and does terrible on the IQ test, which they're gonna, I mean, that's based on verbal fluency, they're going to do terrible. There's no way they're not going to do well. You get an additional IDD, right, thing, which may not even be that, because autism isn't a cognitive delay. It's a developmental delay in your brain. Okay. What I found interesting here is I learned about what autobiographical recall is. And this makes a lot of sense because I worked with a lot of autistic kids. And I would use examples like this. I'd be like, remember, Johnny, when you studied so hard for that test? We worked really hard on that test. You took the test, you got 100, and I'm trying to get the kid to study and actually do, what he needs to do get a good test. Do you remember that? And John would be like, yeah, I remember that. I'm like, do you remember how good that felt? No, because what my graphical recall is not only being able to remember what happened in the past, but to be able to connect to the emotion. And a lot of autistic people don't have that ability because of the extra stuff going on in the cerebellum. Like they can remember what happened, but they can't attach, oh yeah, that felt really good, I'm going to use that as motivation right now to study more. Like if we're looking for people to motivate themselves for past, it's got to be like here and now. We've got to create that motivation in the moment. So an autistic brain begins accelerated growth of this part. We're going to talk about this part of the brain. The amygdala, between 6 months and a year old, processes emotions, memories associated with fear, key to processing strong emotions like fear or pleasure, connects higher cognitive functions to lower functions. Okay, and remember we got a lot more synapses in there to make those connections into those two places, so that when we see something new, a neurotypical brain won't automatically or will be less likely to respond to that as something, to be afraid of that new thing. Or if there's something's going to change, a neurotypical brain is going to be a lot less likely to connect to a place that is going to make them afraid of that change. But if you're autistic, that is much more likely to happen. And that's the reason why, change is bad. Even good change, even vacations can really stress you out because you don't know what to expect. Everything's so different. And I'm sorry, change is bad and newness is bad. We'd rather stick with what we know. Okay. Those are two parts of an autistic brain. Other autistic brain changes are the entire brain grows at an increased rate. Portions of the cerebral cortex folds more intricately and some less. If you take an autistic brain and cut it open, look at that part of your brain, there are actual physical differences in that part of the brain that you can see. You can also see these differences, of course, on brain scans. You'll see that there's activity in an autistic mind in a place where there isn't much activity in a neurotypical mind. Also, there was this cool study where they took known kids that were diagnosed with autism and they had younger siblings, infant siblings. They were able to do brain scans and at much too high of a level, occurrence, tell you if that child was going to be autistic or not. So this is like stuff we know. Like we can point to so many things that this is where autism comes from. Autistic brain is born autistic. There is no demon that comes down and snatches your neurotypical child away. Your child is born to be just who they are. And we need to love them, keeping that mind as they are. Things, lastly, that the cerebral cortex does is sound processing, spatial information, decision-making, motor skills. We can see all of the changes in autistic people with this. And also the visual hub, which means the neurotypical person can look at something and see the entire picture. But for an autistic person, our visual hub is taking in too much information and kind of shorting it out. So they have to focus on details first, or what's called bottom up thinking, right? So every time they look at something, it's going to be detail, 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 whole. And neurotypical thinking is, okay, initially, maybe we'll look at some details, but then like, hey, I've seen that before. I don't need to look at each individual detail to recognize that that's a bird, or to recognize that that's an elephant, even if it's a slightly different color, or that's a tree, even if I've never seen that particular tree before. So I hope this has been helpful. I've really gotten so much out of the group since it started. And I just want to thank all of you who are watching this and are listening to me for doing so. And I hope you do come to visit us in our group. I put a lot of my heart and soul into it every day. And I'm not giving up on it, because one thing my autistic son taught me, and this is something you learn, I guess, from being autistic in a neurotypical world, that persistence is key, right? It's just never give up. Never give up. Just keep on going. So even if like you see this in 10 years from now, I'm really hopeful that our group will still be around. Thank you so much for giving me your time. Have a great day. And that's it. Signing off.